Roger. Go for deploy.
Hey guys, Doc here. Welcome back to another episode of Adventure Fit Radio. So, today, the episode we have for you is a flashback episode. So, while we prepare for 2018, and trust me, we have some preparation to do, we're pretty much ready to go, but it's going to be bloody exciting 2018. I'll explain about that in a sec, but while we prepare for 2018, me and Tommy are having a couple of weeks of, well, we're not having the weeks off because we're recording shows all in the meantime, but we're just getting a few shows in and getting a new process down. So while we do that, we're having two flashback shows. My favourite show from, well, forever, I think this show, Rusty Young and Tony Doherty are probably my favourites. And then we're also going to release next week one of Tommy's favourites from back in the past in the vault. So for those of you that have listened to this show, Rusty Young, then apologies, but I recommend listening to it again because it's a bloody fun show. To those of you guys that haven't, this was a show that was amazing for us because very, very early days, it was our first time we went off-site from Melbourne. We went up to Sydney to do some interviews with a few guests, and Rusty was one of those guests. Rusty is the man that wrote Marching Powder. So if you don't know Marching Powder, it is one of the greatest travel biographies, I suppose. It's not really travel biography. It's a story of a man who was a drug smuggler who got thrown in a Bolivian jail cell that used to run tours. So in Bolivia, you would go to La Paz and you would go into a tour of San Pedro prison. Rusty did the tour, was so interested by what had gone on and especially by Tommy McFadden, the lead protagonist. But the story of Tommy McFadden, he was so fascinated that he decided to stay and live in the prison for 6 months. He documented Tommy's life. He wrote the book, basically. He got all the notes that he used to write the book. He's actually still best friends with Tommy to this day. We caught up with Rusty when he was in Melbourne recently, and he put us on the phone to Tommy. We said hi, and Tommy's been unwell. Rusty's been over visiting him, so it's actually pretty awesome. If you haven't read Marching Powder, go ahead and do so for sure. This is a hilarious show. This is one of the first shows that I really got a feeling that, you know, our podcast could create a very unique opportunity for me and Tommy to really interview our heroes. Marching Powder was my favourite book of all time before I read Shantaram. And sorry if listening, Rusty, it's still right up there. Shantaram is my number one. Shantaram made me cry, and unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you look at it, no other book has been able to do that. But I mean, it's pretty much as good as as good of a book as I've ever read. And the fact that I was able to sit down, connect, have an amazing conversation with Rusty was just awesome. We finished this conversation and it was at Rusty's mum and dad's house. We met his family and just had a great time. As we went to leave, I went to shake Rusty's hand and he just pushed my hand away and just gave me a big hug. And it's an amazing thing to have a platform like this. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'm out there always taking inspiration from other people. You know, there's a lot of people around the world. I'm about to write a blog on this actually this week, but people that I look up to, Aubrey Marcus is one of those. Mark Bell is another one. Joe Rogan. There's a lot of people out there that I really love the way they think. I love what they've done in business. I love the positive impact they've had on the world. And I aspire for myself and for Adventure Fit to be like that. And I'm going to meet Mark in a couple of months. We're going to do a podcast together. We're also doing a bit of business with Adventure Fit together. Going to hopefully meet Aubrey at some point soon. Don't know if I'll meet Rogan anytime soon, as he's one of the probably busiest men on the planet. But having a platform like this is amazing because we're able to go and meet our heroes. So that was really great for me. I was over the moon. It was such a great experience. Anyway, I've waffled on enough. Hopefully you guys like the show. No ads today because it's a flashback episode, so we're not going to bore you with any ads. Rusty Young, Tom Ahern, myself. Hope you enjoy it. Alrighty, here we are, guys. We're sitting with Rusty Young. Or actually, we were scheduled to to sit at Rusty's friend's house, but Rusty's mate had a bender, so we're at Rusty's mum and dad's, and we've got to keep it quiet.
Shout out to Rusty's mate.
They've just come back from England. This is Saturday after the Brexit, so they're sleeping in today, so we've got to keep really quiet.
So, as always, before we throw it over to Rusty and introduce him, we're going to do Tommy's tribute. It's going to be a whisper tribute to Rusty Young.
Alrighty, so this is my whisper / really deep and sexy voice that I'm going to parade here. This is Something in the Way He Moves. It's a tribute of a James Taylor song to my good friend Rusty Young here. Something in the way he moves looks my way and traveled to the south. Every time I read that book, I get a high. If I'm feeling down and blue or troubled by my hits of coke, I really need to read the powder book. But I feel fine. I can't believe I'm whispering. Fine anytime I read the book and I'm high. Despite what the book says, I'm still going to ram ample amounts of cocaine when I go out, because sometimes you really just need to pick me up. And when I'm well, I will tell you that it's a good book, because Munching Powder has been the best read I've read in the past few years, and I'm close to tears when I'm confirmed that Rusty's going to be on the show. Welcome to the show, Mr. Young.
Wow, what a tribute. Thank you very much. I think that's going to go international. It's viral for sure.
Was that a tribute to Rusty or a tribute to cocaine?
I think that was a tribute to cocaine, and Rusty just happened to be in the song.
Rusty, hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and welcome to your listeners.
Yeah, cool. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Rusty, a little bit about your background, and yeah.
Sure. I grew up in Sydney. I was born in Melbourne, and
Melbourne boy.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Just turned 41. I did university at Sydney here. Did a degree in finance and law, but really just didn't like that career path. It was basically, if you get the marks to get in, that's sort of what you did. And I sort of followed that path thinking, oh, this is a guaranteed path to whatever wealth and happiness. And I really, really, really hated it. So, but what I did love was writing, and I loved traveling as well. So every opportunity I got during university breaks, I'd always go traveling. I went to the Middle East, went through Europe. Mm-hmm. My parents took me overseas a few times when I was younger. And so those were my two big passions, writing and traveling, and sport as well, obviously. I love fitness and stuff. So
cool.
So basically ever since leaving university, that's sort of what I've tried to do, is travel around the world, write, and stay happy.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So what was it that made your mind up that you didn't want to go down the path of being a lawyer, being in the corporate world? Was there a certain thing?
Yeah, there was a trigger event. I was working for a leading merchant bank, and often you do really long weeks, like 70 hours, and often on weekends as well. And so It was a Saturday night. It was my friend's party. I think I was like 23 or so. And my friends are calling me saying, "Are you coming? Are you coming to dinner?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm coming." And they're like, "No, you're not coming. You're staying here doing this prospectus." And I was like, "Really?" And then they're calling me from the nightclub, and they're all out drinking and doing whatever else, saying, "You coming?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm coming." And I was just like, "This is not me." Saturday night, everyone else is out partying. I'm like, I don't want to spend my 20s and 30s, under fluorescent lights in an office building. You can make money, you can buy a house, you can get a really nice car, but big deal, you never get those years back. So
100%. Yep.
So, at the risk of not making that same sort of level of income, I thought, what, I just want to be happy. I want to go and do the things that I am passionate about in the world.
That's amazing. That's exactly, I won't go into my story, but that's exactly the same age that the same thing happened to me. I had 3 properties when I was 23, just riddled with mortgage debt and so on and so forth. I had a really bad year. I was sick for a year, and I did the same thing. I read your book, and then I started traveling. I did 6 months through South America, and totally changed my life. Realised there's more important things. So,
but like you said, we won't go into your story.
Yeah. But
this is not about you.
Yeah, that's right.
This is about me.
This is about Rusty here.
So So when did you actually start writing? When did you start? Did you journal things? Did you do short blogs?
Yeah, I had a school teacher in high school when I was 12 who got us to start writing a diary.
Yep.
And that was probably my first sort of serious attempts at writing, was just doing a diary, and I still write a diary to this day. So I've probably got about 2 million word diary.
Wow.
So every now and then, now that I've been drinking for so long, I often forget what happened back in 1997. So I just go back to my diary I read back over my life. It's really interesting. So yeah, I probably started with a diary when I was 12, and probably around about 15 or so, I really started going, I absolutely love reading. I love writing. It's something I'd love to be able to do. And my parents were like, well, that's great, but what are you going to do for money? Because obviously, you know, being an artist of any kind, or particularly being a writer in a small country with a small market like Australia, it's really difficult to try and make a living out of it, let alone do well. And obviously, you know, I come from my family's pretty hardworking family, and so they always encouraged me at least to have a plan B in place.
Yeah.
That was basically why I pushed myself through university, even though I hated it.
Yeah, for sure. That's not a bad plan B. Worst case scenario. So, is it actually, like you say, is it actually hard to make a living as a writer yourself? You have one major hit, and you have your next book coming out, which we'll talk about later. But how does it the finances go?
I've been pretty lucky. I mean, that was my first book. I wrote it when I was 25. It came out when I was 27.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, that with the movie deal, selling that book around the world, but that's the exception. I think
for sure.
I was reading some statistics recently that the average Australian writer's income is $13,000 per year, right? Wow. So you really need to have a second career option in place. And you know, since writing Marching Powder, I have had different jobs. I lived in South America, I worked in South America. So, I think you've got to keep a balance between the income you can get from writing and also trying to look at other sources of either other sources of income, or looking at ways to make your life a lot cheaper, like living. Yeah. I spent a lot of time living outside of Australia in developing nations like Asia, South America. Yep. Just wherever it's cheap to live, because obviously as a writer you can, you don't need to be in an office, you can be anywhere. So
for sure. All right, before we go into, I want to ask about South America and where you lived and what your time spent over there. But let's go into Marching Powder. So how old were you when you went through South America, and then what brought on the want to actually write Tommy's story and put it into a book?
Yeah, so I was travelling through South America when I was 24 years old with my then girlfriend. We were still at university. Yep. And we were travelling I went through Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and we're just travelling around. And obviously I was keeping my diary and sending out, this is in the early days of the internet, or relatively early days of the internet. Mm-hmm. So I was sending out just sort of, I guess, travelogues, emails to friends, and obviously they would forward them on to their other friends. This is pre-Facebook, pre-Instagram, all that sort of pre-digital cameras even.
This is the original World Wide Web.
And so I was just sending out little emails, and then the one about the prison went the equivalent of viral, and in other words, like maybe it got forwarded 100 times. But
which was a world record at the time.
It was a world record. So I ended up it was at the end of our. Do you want to stop there because of the phone?
It's cool. There's a phone in the background, but our listeners have heard worse than that.
That's right. They've heard a lot worse than that.
Okay.
Unless you need to get it, of course.
No, this is not my house. So we were just traveling. We'd been traveling through Bolivia for 2 months, and then everyone was just saying, look, when you get to La Paz, you really need to go and visit the prison. And I was like, why on earth would anyone want to go and visit a third world prison on their vacation? Isn't it dangerous? And they're like, no, it's not dangerous at all. The prisoners look after you. You know, there's women and children living in there. There's cats and dogs, and there's heaps of drugs. And I'm like, this sounds really dangerous. Like, do you actually go inside? And like, yeah. So what happens is you get to the door, you take your passport. You're not allowed to take a camera. Mm-hmm. You have to hand your passport into the gate guards. They open the gate, and it shuts behind you. Clang. And then you're in this prison. It's a fully functioning prison for adult males. Yeah. But it doesn't at all seem like a prison. You walk in, there's as I said before, there's women and children, there's cats and dogs, there's Coca-Cola signs, there's everyone's colourfully dressed. None of the prisoners wear uniforms, so they're all dressed in civilian attire. and there are shops and there are televisions and
Such a strange setup, isn't it?
It's got to be one of
hard
the
to imagine.
strangest things you'd ever see.
Absolutely, like obviously my adrenaline was rushing. I was like, oh, this is a prison, right? And this is a third
Remember
world
where
prison.
you are.
Remember where you are. And then Thomas greeted me at the gate. He said, hey man, how you doing? I'm like, all right. And he had quite a big, good. He had quite a big bodyguard with him. Like I said, the guy was about 6 foot something, which is really big in South America. And so he's just like, look, just keep cool. Nothing's going to happen to you. And he walked us around the prison. There are 8 different sections. Each one of those sections has a hotel-style star rating. So there's the 5-star ratings, where 5-star hotel rating is where all the wealthy drug traffickers and sort of corrupt politicians who have embezzled funds live. And then down in the 1, 2-star and 0-star sections, the inmates are really poor and they're often addicted to drugs. So they live maybe 4 or 5 inside one little tiny cell, which they call coffins. It's like literally, it's like a little catacomb kind of thing. Yeah. And they're all sort of lying there side by side. And
did you get a tour of that area? Of everywhere?
Yes, so we did the whole tour. And this was during the day, so it was relatively peaceful during the day. And I was just like, this is just a trip, right? There were girls on the tour. There was no danger. We sat down. We had some lunch with some of the inmates. We looked at all the handicrafts that they were making. You buy little trinkets and souvenirs. And I was like, wow, that doesn't seem like a prison at all. It's like a holiday camp. And then Thomas is like, well, at night time that's when the danger comes out. Yeah. So he took us back to his cell and he got rid of most of the tourists and he kept a few of us, and he sort of laid out some lines of cocaine. And I was like, coming from law school, I was like, this is entrapment. I was like, and the door was shut and I was just looking at the door thinking, oh, any second now the police are going to burst in.
I'm going to have my own cell.
Yeah.
I'm going to be moving in next door.
This is part of a trick, right? And Thomas is like, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, do I trust this guy? And the police are going to set me up. He goes, but look, this is the place. This is the safest place in the world to do cocaine. He goes, what are they going to do if they bust you? Put you in prison. And I was like, well, I'm not doing it. You do it. And because this is my stupid legal mind going. Undercover agents can't take drugs themselves, so make him do it. So he does a line of cocaine. I was like, okay, so this wasn't a trap. And,
this is party time.
We're on it.
And so then I ended up staying there the whole night, and then another night because we woke up quite late the next day. And I was just like, wow, I've spent a couple of nights in prison, and I was like, wow, this is just an absolute trip. Someone should write a book about this. And he's just like, yeah, well, do it. Let's do it. Let's write a book. So Thomas left school when he was relatively young and went off drug trafficking. He was moving heroin through India and Pakistan. He was in, he got taken by, he's got some really interesting stories. He got taken by the Taliban at one stage because they thought he was undercover DEA because he couldn't speak, he was black. And
this is the prequel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because he's black and he spoke only English or mainly English. They sort of assumed he was American. He's had plenty of stories before he actually started shifting cocaine through South America, but obviously the marching powder concentrated just on his particular drug trafficking ventures through Bolivia.
Did you have what type of relationship did you have with Tommy? When obviously for someone to tell not their life story, but a story such as the story of marching powder, to entrust that to you, did you actually feel like when you met with Tommy and you sat down, you spent a couple of days with him, you had a real rapport? Like you felt like you were really connected?
Absolutely. Look, he's a genuinely open, friendly guy. So he's friendly with everyone. I'm sure everyone felt a kind of sense of connection with him when they first met him. And look, obviously, we spent 2 nights drinking and talking, and and obviously because I've sort of got a curious mind, I spent a lot of time asking him questions, and some things he'd answered and some things he wouldn't. Like, for example, obviously, it took quite a while before I said, did you actually, are you guilty? And he's just like, well, I'm not going to answer that question. Yeah. Right. So it did take a little while to build up the trust. And obviously, after 2 nights, I was like, great, let's write a book. And I was thinking, look, how long does it take anyone to tell their life story? I mean, we're trying to cover my story here in an hour or so. Yeah. I was like, maybe a week of research. No, but it was like literally 4 months in there with him gradually telling me more and more and more and getting deeper and deeper into his backstory about his life, where he grew up, what his family life was like. It's the really, really deeply personal issues that that motivate people's psychology and stuff. So I won't say it was instantaneous, but obviously when you're spending time in a confined space over 3 or 4 months, and basically, working together on a project, you have to develop a really, really sort of close
100%.
bond, close sense of trust as well.
For sure.
Was it, one of the things I really love about Marching Powder is that as you go through reading it, you really start to get a bond with Thomas, but every now and then it'll flick over in my mind. I'm going, hang on, this guy's a bloody drug dealer. Is that something just on that relationship you had with him that you kept sort of flicking the switch and going, hang on, I'm hanging out with a, pretty dangerous dude?
So one of the, I guess one of the questions or dilemmas I had was, how do I write this book, dude? If I wrote it as a strictly sort of objective journalistic piece, then my own judgment might have entered into it, like as in, hang on, this guy's a criminal. He's not really repentant at all. Like he was
just shopping your life.
He was actually quite boastful about how good he was as a drug trafficker.
You're not that good, mate.
That's right.
He's like, Bolivian prison cell.
That was the irony. He's like, yeah, I'm the best trafficker ever. I'm like, yeah, but you're in prison.
You never said that though.
No. So the question was, do you just stick to the hard, cold, dry facts and then risk kind of making the book a little bit boring? And I decided in the end the best way to do it was to tell the story as he was telling it himself.
Yep.
I think people relate to that because, obviously you can read between the lines and go, "You guy's really charming, he's lovely," but he's obviously also done some pretty horrible stuff. So it sort of allows the reader to make up his or her own mind about what sort of person Thomas is.
Yes.
So I'm going to give it a reverb here. Is there any way of...
So you had a good working relationship with Thomas, and you're talking about obviously writing it from his perspective, and he obviously thinks he's maybe more endearing than he is. I don't know, but you have to make an endearing character for readers. Is it a fair portrayal of him, or was there more to Tommy the much darker side? Or?
No, I think it is a fair portrayal. And look, obviously, it's him telling his own story, and each of us have our own narrative about how we see ourselves. And if any one of us were to tell our own life story, obviously we're going to cast ourselves as kind of the hero, or at least not as the bad guy. And,
Johnny Depp's playing me for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
I should have said, what's his name? Wolverine, Hugh Jackman.
Oh yeah, that's
Hugh
right.
Jackman sometimes.
He never gets it. He just thinks he does.
I can see that.
Yeah, so it was pretty. Yeah, but he was a good guy. Obviously, he was a good
lovely guy. And we're still friends to this day. And when we speak, we actually spoke 2 days ago.
Really?
Yeah. And he's now had he was born in Tanzania and then grew up in the UK, but he's now back living in Africa, and he had a boy, and he named his first son Rusty.
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
Yeah,
wow.
So that's quite a...
Who did he name it after?
That's only, the only bigger tribute I've had than that is the song from Tommy, from this Tom.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. We won't go which one was better.
we obviously know.
We obviously already know.
Well, that's awesome. So we'll go back. We'll get back into the the writing process. So what is Tommy up to now then?
So he's off the drugs. Stopped. Never went back to trafficking, which is great.
Wow.
He after leaving the prison in Bolivia, we moved to Colombia, which may not have been the best place for someone who was trying to get away from corruption, violence, and drugs. But we lived there together for a year. Then he went back to London for 3 or 4 years, and now he's back in Africa. And he owns a chicken farm with 2,000 chickens.
Wow!
And he works in an international hotel as a tourist guide of all things. So,
wow! So you lived with Tommy in Colombia after the book was released,
So the research component took 4 months inside San Pedro prison. Then at the end of it, he got out of prison, and then we needed somewhere to live. Well, basically the book wasn't written; it was just the research, all the interviews that we did on a tape recorder. And this is pre-digital, so we all had these little micro cassettes.
Right.
I used to smuggle the micro cassettes out of the prison into a safe house, and then come back in. I had a tape recorder on the inside and one on the outside, so I didn't have to smuggle the recorder each time.
Yep.
And so I just take the tapes out and then play them on the outside and transcribe. But the actual writing of the book took a year to write and 6 months to edit. So during that time, Thomas is just like, well, you might have some follow-up questions, and I've got no money, and so and
works for both of us.
Yeah. You're my brother. You're my prison brother. So we obviously had developed a very close friendship. So we lived in Bogota for a whole year.
Yeah, cool. So what's an interesting story, like a personal story about Tommy that we don't know from the book, from your travels, maybe from your time in Colombia?
Oh, just trying. I might have to think about that one.
Well, what was he getting up to over there, by the way? Like in Colombia, if he's not obviously trafficking drugs and he's straight out of prison, how do you make ends meet in Colombia?
Well, that was one of the things. I was in huge amounts of debt because I'd taken my 2 credit cards, and I kept trying to tell Thomas not to traffic drugs from inside the prison because I thought that was a big risk if he got busted and he had to stay in the prison. I couldn't ethically release the book, so. I was sort of supporting both of us inside the prison using my credit cards. And then obviously we needed an income. There were teaching jobs available in Bogota at the time. There were very few foreigners travelling through Colombia. Mm-hmm. And you could earn some decent money as an English teacher there. So we went up there and, Thomas, even though he grew up in the UK, he's really got a mixture of accents and he's not educated. So I was like, how is he going to, even though he's from the UK, how is he going to teach English? So we would go to job interviews and I would fill out the quiz, the questionnaire, the test, I guess, to get the job. And I would put Thomas McFadden on top of mine. He'd put Rusty Young and Rusty Young would end up with, not great grades. And Thomas McFadden would end up getting the job. So what a classic. So he ended up as an English tutor for executives in the corporate world in Colombia.
That's a classic. Cool. So what does the writing process actually look like? So you were writing it in Colombia. You were putting the everything together. Was it all written in Colombia? Yeah, it
was all written in Colombia. And then I came back to Australia, found a publisher, and then edited it here in Australia. So, but it was written over a year in Colombia. We were living together. So basically, I would listen to the tapes, transcribe them, and then write it up into kind of a vignette or a short story, and then I'd read it out to Thomas, and he'd go, "Yeah, except that you got that wrong, or you missed this bit, or I didn't tell you this." Then I'd go back and adjust it, and it was really valuable to have the subject of the book there to correct any errors or add any sort of details that were missing.
Yeah, highlight the importance of some bits that'll follow on down the line.
Yeah, and we used to sort of sit in the park, and he'd smoke a joint, and I don't like marijuana. It makes me a bit paranoid, but I'll just sit there in the park and read out the chapters as they were as I was writing them. Mm-hmm. And it was also really valuable just to kind of hear your own voice reading it aloud, because then you get the kind of the rhythm, I guess, the cadence of the story as well, and the voice. So that was it. It was definitely a sort of a group effort. We did the interviews. I wrote it, transcribed them, wrote them into vignettes. That's the first draft. Read them out to Thomas. He'd correct them. I'd rewrite them, and then eventually I brought them back. And sort of really, Marching Powder is just a collection of short stories, of the highlights or the highlights and lowlights of his time there. And then the challenge was then taking all these disparate stories that occurred during different parts of a 4 or 5 year period and trying to link them together into a kind of cohesive narrative. Mm. So that was the other challenge, was because basically the way he told the stories to me were basically as a series of anecdotes. So then you've got to try and impose a structure on top of that.
Yeah, you've got to try and get more out of him, I suppose, and put him into readable.
It's more about creating, a story arc, because you've got all these stories that occurred one might occur in October of the first year, the next one occurs the next June. So how do you link those two different anecdotes together? And obviously the key there was Thomas and his voice, and the fact that all these crazy, bizarre stories occurred to one man.
Yeah. So what was your life like when you were in Colombia at this stage? You were telling us just earlier, you were 24 or 5 when you were writing?
No, so at this stage I was 26 at this 26. Stage, yeah. So I was 25 when I was in the prison with Thomas, and then I turned 26 when I moved to Colombia. So my job, my life was getting up in the morning, teaching English to executives at about 6 o'clock for an hour and a half till 7:30. Then I'd go back, do some writing. Then at 12 o'clock again, I'd do an hour and a half class, and then one more at 5 o'clock from 5 till 6:30. So 3 times a day I was working as an English teacher. Mm-hmm. When my Spanish improved, I got an extra job as a translator. So I would translate newspaper articles or embassy documents at night time, and I could really get to choose my own hours then. So basically working to pay the rent and just between times writing. It was really exciting times because I was following my passion, but we had no idea about writing a book. You know, as my very first attempt at writing a book, and we didn't have a publisher. I didn't know any publishers. Didn't know how to get published. So there was a sort of sense of, wow, this is a fun.
I hope this pays off.
Yeah, this better pay off. This better pay off. Yeah, we're in debt, and I was like, you know.
Did you think you're onto something though? Did you know that you're like, because you listen to some of the stories, even in anecdotes, you put the 10 best stories throughout the book on a page and you read them individually, you go, fuck it, this is amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean? Did you think, I'm really onto a winner here?
Look, I did say, like, the very first night, that's probably the same sense of amazement as readers get on their first read through, right? So I'm like, this is amazing. This should be a book. Why hasn't someone written a book? Why hasn't someone done a movie? This is the most incredible place on planet Earth. And then obviously, you know, a year and a half later, you're really starting to doubt yourself. You've been over those same stories so many times that they lose their impact. And I'm like, by the end, I was just like, you know, why would anyone want to read this book? Why would anyone be interested in prison in South America? Why would I be the person to write it? You know, it's a real process of kind of following your passion, trying to inspire yourself to keep going, to believe in yourself, and then on the flip side, this incredible sort of levels of self-criticism and self-doubt where you're going, shit, I actually got to try and find a publisher now. How do I do that? And are people going to like this book? And, you know, I'd lost a real sense of whether or not the story was actually exciting.
Right.
And I said the same thing about my next book. You know, I've spent 8 years researching it in Colombia, and I think Colombia is one of the most incredible countries I've ever been to. And I was like, this is just amazing, some of these stories. And then obviously many years later, you're writing the same stories, rereading them, editing them, and you go, this is actually quite boring.
I feel like we're in the exact same scenario right now. You said whenever I write a tribute, I'm like, oh no.
So was it hard to stay motivated because were you living the life of a 26-year-old in Colombia? You know what I mean? Were you taking drugs over there? Was the doubt through a little bit of a
I was being as responsible as possible. I was waking up, you had to get up at 5:30 to get to 6 o'clock class, and you couldn't be hungover you can't turn up in a one-on-one class stinking of whiskey, right? You're sitting there with a student who's paying good money to learn a language,
How many days a week were those classes?
Yeah, so Monday to Friday, as many classes as I could
so
get.
you're living a full 100% hardworking life.
Yeah, look, it was Monday to Friday. Colombia is a really exciting country. There were very few foreigners there. There's lots of parties. The women are really beautiful.
And most beautiful women in the world. And
Colombian people in general are really, really friendly, hospitable, and they were so excited to sort of see foreigners there. So we had, I was working really, really flat out. I'd go to the gym as well, try and get out of town, just sort of get a mental break as often as possible. Definitely. But obviously really cheaply getting, public buses, which was sometimes dangerous because there's like 8 kidnaps per day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just it was an exciting time. We really didn't have much money. Going back to your question before about stories about Thomas, and when we were living together, there were 3 of us in this shared flat. And it was pretty tight. Like each one of us had our own little shelf on the refrigerator, right? And we'd do common shopping and stuff. And there was a few times when the toilet paper ran out. And I was like, well, I got the last roll, and we're talking 50 cents.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, I got
one roll at a time.
I got the last 2 or 3 rolls. It's your turn. Yeah. I was like, no, I got the last roll. And then eventually, basically, we stopped buying toilet paper. we stopped buying.
Going out the window.
Well, no, we would just. Everyone would buy their own toilet roll and keep it in their room.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you go to the bathroom, you take your own toilet roll. You're like, that's what it got to. I really didn't have much money. I was sleeping on really thin mattresses on the floor. But you'd wake up and it'd be like it can be quite cold in Bogota. And it's like, what on earth am I doing here? Like, so living in relative poverty. I mean, I obviously was never as poor as Colombians, and I always had the opportunity, if I'd really chosen to come back and be a lawyer here. So I don't think I've ever really experienced true poverty, but certainly relative to the standard of living in Australia and Sydney, living on the floor on a thin mattress, eating rice and pasta and potatoes, and scrimping and saving over toilet paper. It was a sort of a daily reminder of like why it is I'm here. What am I doing here? I'm here to write this book. So I think, sometimes having less comfortable surroundings can be a source of inspiration, a reminder of what's important to you. You can be surrounded by, countries like Australia and industrialized nations. You can get fooled into thinking that the important things is living in a nice suburb or having a nice car or having the best clothes or going out to the nice restaurants. But those things can also be big distractions in terms of following your own passion.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
I don't know if I found, living in a foreign country with a different language, not having much money it stripped my life and my sort of sense of purpose in life back to the basics. So I never really forgot my purpose.
Yeah.
There would have
great.
also been many times though where you would have, I guess, missed that sort of way of living. I mean, I'm just from hearing it from yourself, being in a place like Colombia where it's just so different to Australia. You would have had sort of, I'm guessing, weeks where it's like, what am I doing? Would have been tough. Definitely would have been tough.
Yeah, I mean, look, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Probably that was the country where I was following my passion. I finally had the sort of courage to have a go at it, and I think even if Marching Pedro had never found a publisher in the world, never heard the story, I wouldn't have regretted it because at least I was having a go. If I had to go back to being a lawyer, then I would have been disappointed, but at least I had a crack at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the most important part. You never would have forgiven yourself if you had not put pen to paper, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd probably have a house and a white picket fence and 2 1/4 children and a Range Rover or something. But
All the boring shit.
How would you have a quarter children? We'll go into that.
Timeshare.
That's right.
So when you you came back to Sydney. How did the process of getting an editor, actually getting the book published, how did that all go about? And when did you figure out, I might have a hit on my hands here?
Yeah, I was really, really lucky. As I said, I knew nothing about publishing. I knew no publishers, but because I was sending out these emails from the prison, they had actually had internet inside the prison. So guy, our next door neighbour, whose name was Barber Choker, and he was busted with 4.2 tons of cocaine in his own aeroplane.
He's in the book, isn't he?
He's in the book, yeah. So he actually, he had cell phone and he had internet as well inside the prison. So I was sending out these sort of draft, very, very rough first drafts, and people going, wow, kept going and sending it on to their mates. And imagine you're sitting in an office building as a lawyer in Melbourne or Sydney, and you're receiving these, this crazy friend of yours mail outs going, yes, I'm in prison and I'm just hanging out with this guy with 4.2 tons of cocaine and the prison cat called Crack Cat. And sending out these stories, and they were getting forwarded on. And they came across the desk of a friend of mine, good friend of mine, who's a publicist at Pan Macmillan Australia, and she's like, when you actually come back to Sydney and want to find a publisher, please come and talk to us first. And so that was my first protocol. In the meantime, I'd sent out the draft manuscript to publishers and to agents here in Australia, and I've still got the rejection letters. They like some of the best publishers and agents in Australia said, we apologise, but we think this has no market in the Australian publishing industry, basically, and
that's interesting.
J.K. Rowling got affected. Well, J.K. Rowling got rejected a fair few times as well, didn't she?
Harry Potter 27 times or something like that.
I didn't get 27 rejections, and I was just really lucky to have one publisher in particular that was really, really passionate about it. And so, I'm really, really grateful to them. So they just showed so much enthusiasm. I didn't have to go around looking for another one. I just sort of said yes, and I was really, blown away by their enthusiasm. And they were so professional and did a really great job of editing and marketing it and explaining to me the whole process. It was a real learning process for me. And I still think there was a degree of luck involved there as well, because what might seem fascinating, what might seem like that was an obvious bestseller, right? When you read it, you go, yeah, that's, of course, it's an amazing story. And then, but at the point when it wasn't published, other people were saying, no, this has got there's no market.
Really?
So there's very difficult to know when you're writing your first book whether or not it's actually going to get published.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you have any? Did Tommy? Was Tommy financially involved in any way in the story? Like, did he profit from the story, or he just wanted to put his story on paper and let his story be told because it was such
there are laws against people becoming
profiting from crime. Yes, gotcha.
Yeah, that's right. I've really got to stop being a drug dealer.
So you mentioned Crack Cat before. Have we touched on Crack Cat yet?
Not yet, but we're going to get into it. We're going to speak about the Crack Cat.
Yeah. Why don't you tell for the listeners? So, Marching Pedro, obviously, we've discussed the book. There's some amazing characters throughout the book.
Absolutely.
One of the characters that you come across is a cat that's somewhat addicted to crack cocaine.
Which is actually preluded. The coolest thing that I like about the story, which is a really sort of off-remark little piece of information, is that when we were talking about at the start when he's walking through the airport terminals, and it goes into that little tangent about how the they get all the dogs over there addicted to cocaine, so they're super keen to find cocaine.
This is true.
That's amazing. I never knew that. Never knew that.
Yeah.
But is Crack Cat, like, why don't you tell the story about when you're your first meeting with Crack Cat, and is that one of the weirdest things that you saw in the prison, or is there more that you could?
Oh, look, the very first night there's two different types of cocaine. There's cocaine hydrochloride, which is the sort of white crystal powder stuff that it's actually a salt that you inhale.
Yeah.
And then there's something called cocaine base, which is the stage before the final crystal, and it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot rougher. And if you smoke it, it's really highly addictive. It's a bit like crack cocaine. Mm-hmm. So there was the two different classes of drug takers inside this prison. The sort of 4 and 5 star prisoners who were taking cocaine hydrochloride, and then in the poorer sections they were smoking cocaine base. And it's pretty scary seeing people on cocaine base. They really basically get really, really high. They get really agitated. There's one guy that we saw who he would smoke some, and he'd become so instantly agitated that he'd then pull out a knife and slash himself across the stomach in order to sort of jolt himself out of the agitation, and also basically give himself an adrenaline rush. So that was pretty freakish.
Wow.
And then we went to this other guy's room. So sort of part of the tour was Tom was like, do you want to see the base smokers? And at first it sounds like, I want to see people smoke. I've never seen people smoking cocaine, never seen. And
he's like, do you want to see?
It's kind of like something you think you want to see, and then when you actually see it, it's really horrific. Like that's
for sure.
I would never ever touch that particular drug. It's it's scary. And because in the poor sections they have really small cells with no ventilation. And you're allowed pets. There's one guy who had a cat, and he lived with his cat in this tiny cell, but it had no windows, right? So it's just this concrete, tiny concrete room. And obviously he was smoking base. The cat's in the room the whole time. And I'm talking, this guy's smoking crack 24 hours. Yeah. And so you imagine the whole room is just permeated with this. Toxic smoke. When I was in there, I was like, actually, can we leave the door open, because I don't want to get high from this smoke.
No way.
Yeah. So this poor cat was obviously, it became passively, from passive smoking, became passively addicted to.
What a fucking unlucky, what a shit roll of the dice for that.
Well, when he's on it, he'd be the luckiest cat in the world.
The cat was, it was pretty grumpy when it wasn't high, and then basically the guy would light up his little pipe and breathe it in. The cat would sort of pick its ears up, start climbing up his chest, and then as the guy breathed out the smoke, he'd blow it at the cat, and the cat would just breathe it in, sneeze, and then it would just start purring.
That's so
Having
cool.
the time of its life.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
What about when you were writing the book, were you staying on the outside and you were coming in during the day, like you said? You weren't staying there for 3 months, or you were staying there?
So I stayed inside the prison in Thomas's room for 3 months.
Really?
And then after 3 months I got arrested. And then thereafter I could only go in as a visitor just during the day. So as I said before, the 4 months I was there doing the research was mainly about recording the interviews on these microcassettes and then doing a few really rough drafts to send out to via email. Yep. And then the actual writing I did in Colombia over a year.
Yeah. So did it get pretty saddening for you day to day coming in? I mean, it sounds like you talk about the prison, you write about the prison, how it's so different, and it's a very family environment. There's obviously it's a male prison, but there's females everywhere because they're living with the inmates. There's children running around. There's greenery. There's trees. There's restaurants, so on and so forth. But did it ever get kind of depressing for the fact that these kids are spending their time with dangerous criminals, and the stories that you actually hear and you start to unravel? Did it start to be like,
definitely not. My perception changed over time. Obviously for the first week or so I was like, wow, this is exciting. I'm in a prison that everyone's doing drugs. There's how many other people have done this during their lifetimes, left a career in law and left all that behind and come and done something crazy like living in a prison voluntarily. So that was the first week. And then very quickly boredom in particular set in. We had free movement. There was no lockdown or anything, but I had a copy of the key to Thomas's cell, so I could just move around the prison as I chose. But you pretty quickly realise that even though it's a very liberal prison model, it's still a prison. You're still stuck in there, and the inmates basically, I think their main problem is boredom. And unfortunately, when people get bored, they start looking for excitement, and they often turn to drugs. And that
violence?
was. Yeah, not so much. Not so much. I mean, violence was there when people owed money for drug debts or there were a few little prison gangs and stuff because basically you have to make your own money inside the prison. The state doesn't pay for anything. You have to pay for your own clothes.
Yeah.
They do give soup once a day, but it's pretty watered down soup because all the money gets stolen. So basically you have to buy your own food, cook your own food. You have to buy your own prison cell. So you can imagine like kind of people are quite desperate for money inside there. So wherever there are pockets of wealth, there's fierce competition and potential violence. So that's true, obviously, for the tours. There was always quite a stiff competition for the tours and also for the drug market. So, if you were a hardworking person with your own trade, for example, there was a doctor in there who was in there for stabbing his wife 53 times, but he continued to be a doctor to the inmates, and he could prescribe antibiotics and stuff. It's not someone you go to for an injection, but
you know what though? I don't think that actually. Look, I may be totally wrong here because I'm not a psychologist. I don't know how this would affect the inmates, but it actually having like a societal structure where you have to make an income, you have to buy real estate, you have
can't be detrimental. Is that what you're saying?
It's probably not a bad thing because you know how so many inmates in prisons that don't work like San Pedro, they come out and they have no grasp on reality and social structure and so forth. So even though it's so weird and so wacky and so strange, who knows? It might for the people actually trying to read.
Well, this was the argument. This was the argument that this is the argument the government was making, that it was, essentially their aim was to not break prisoners' bonds with society. So basically the prison was in the middle of the major city there, La Paz. It allowed family members to come in, to stay the night. So they didn't, the wives and the girlfriends didn't typically abandon their husbands. Whereas, let's say if you got a 5 to 10 year sentence in Australia and you got limited visiting hours, do you think women and children are going to stand by you for all that time? Yeah. Well, if you're lucky, they will. But in most cases, I imagine it put a huge strain on a relationship. And so when the inmates come out, they've got nothing to go back to. They've got no job to go back to. They've got no family to go back to. And that can cause massive levels of resentment and
repeat offence.
So this particular model was, it was quite progressive in some ways, in that the inmates' bonds with society weren't destroyed. They were able to live with some sort of independence, some sort of dignity, exercise a profession or a trade or a craft from within inside the prison. That was the explanation. That was the official explanation the government gave. I mean, the unofficial explanation is that there was just no money, or the money had been stolen. So basically, the system actually evolved out of sheer necessity, basically. It's like, you're in prison, we've got no money for uniforms or for food, so we're going to let you do whatever you want.
And the reason we've done this for you is so that you...
that's right, because we're trying to help you guys. Hey, considering why you're here. Oh, hey, Rusty. Did you have any sort of different reactions that the inmates gave you? I know you're a tourist there, and they had many tourists coming in, but you were there for so long. Did people start to react to you differently?
Yeah, obviously. At first, Thomas got permission saying that I was his cousin, which is pretty unlikely because he's black and I'm white.
This is my black dad.
But we claimed that I was married to one of his distant cousins, and that kind of...
You can make it work.
You can make that work for...
Plus a couple extra Bolivianos and make that work.
That's right. For $100, people will believe anything.
This dog is my brother-in-law?
Yeah. So look, at first that was the claim, and then the next claim was obviously when Thomas started going to court, because he was up on further drug charges. I bought a suit and tie, and I'd go to court with him as well. So I started coming into the prison with Thomas when he was in handcuffs, acting as though I was his international humanitarian lawyer. Sorry, excuse me. Acting as if I was his international humanitarian lawyer and human rights lawyer, and so we had sort of various different sort of subterfuges going on.
Wow.
But after a while, it was like, okay, so this guy's not in here to get high like all the other backpackers.
Yeah.
What are they doing in that room the whole time? And people would come and knock on the door, and we have to obviously turn the tape recorder off, hide the tapes and stuff. And so people are just like, so what are you guys doing in here talking every day for 5 hours a day?
I didn't think you were like a behind the scenes couple. In all seriousness though.
No, because Thomas had girls coming in as well.
But did they think you were undercover potentially? Or?
Well, so after 3 months, of sneaking these micro cassettes in and out of the prison, I finally got arrested on the way in actually. And so I used to bribe the guards. Just you basically fold up say a 20 Boliviano bill, so what's it, like $2 or $3? Mm-hmm. Just fold it up, put it between your fingers, and then shake hands, and they'd just take the money and no one would see it. Mm. And then they what's this? And I'm like, I don't know, money, like the same sort of bribe. And so I think they really did. The guards and the other prisoners started to get suspicious about what it is that we were doing with these micro cassettes. And I had been 3 days before I was bribing this guy. They did a proper search. They found these cassettes down my underwear, and they're like, "What's this?" And they didn't have any means of playing it. But that was the point where we're just like, okay, we're playing with fire here, because if they do get a hold of this and work out what we're doing, we could be in big trouble. Yeah. The main thing that saved us obviously was they didn't have the tape recorder to play it, and they didn't speak English, so we were conducting our interviews in English. But there was another guy inside the prison called Samir, who was one of Thomas's friends, who was pretty crazy, and the police used to take him outside out of the prison at 2 a.m. to rob cars, right? Because he was a really good car thief, and they'd go and steal 4 or 5 cars, then put him back in the prison and give him $100 per car. And eventually they stopped paying him. Like, I said, the cops owed him money, and he's like, right, that's it, I'm going to write to the parliament. And so he started writing letters to the parliament saying, this is what these cops are doing. And then they found him hanging in his cell with obvious signs of torture.
Wow.
So that was the point where I was like, oh wow, this has been a bit of a fun game for me. Yeah. And obviously if something big did go down, then I could just get in a plane, leave the country and go, that's it, I'm not doing that book. But for Thomas, that was his life, and he was the one who was stuck in there, and he was like, mate, you need to take this really, really seriously.
Yeah, of course.
And to make sure you hide those tapes really well, make sure you do not open your mouth, do not be seen, record, don't go around interviewing other inmates until the very end. So basically, the first few months was just interviewing Thomas, and it was only at the end when we knew he was going to get out that I would then start trying to cross-check the facts of his story with other inmates, because if I'd walked around all the other sections with the tape recorder in hand asking questions about cocaine laboratories and police corruption, you can imagine that that word would have travelled pretty quickly back to the guards, and something could have happened. And
what about the same sort of deal when the book was actually being published? I mean, there's so much stuff in there, like you just mentioned, about the actual corruption of the place. Did you ever get any sort of communication from back there that people weren't happy?
Yeah, so between finding a publisher and getting the advance for the book and the book actually coming out, I was like, I actually really want to record this like on video, because I was actually scared no one was actually going to believe me. So we went back in there with a good friend of mine called Niels van Ipperen, who's a Dutch photographer. And we just shot some sort of commando documentary footage inside there. And we put that together with Australian ABC with a program called Foreign Correspondent. And basically sort of, I guess, documented and proved pretty much all the claims I made in the book.
Shit.
And
You're
obviously,
a real gangster.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Obviously
no way you're doing this shit.
Bolivia. So when we were in Bolivia, we tricked our way into the prison. We had to bribe the guards to get the cameras inside. And then as we were filming, the police came to our hotel and said, hand over the tapes. We know what you're doing. And we had to just leave the country. So basically you had to sort of pretty much go, yeah, we'll hand the tapes over. We'll make you some copies. Come back tomorrow and we'll give you the tapes. And then, of course, as a journalist, you can't reveal your sources, or you can't give your sources away. You lose all credibility and you can put them in danger. So
100%.
we just skedaddled straight to the airport, and that was a pretty scary moment.
Wow.
And
Shit, man.
look, the government's always denied all these claims about having to buy prison cells, about the tours and so on. But ever since then, there's been, and particularly with the internet now, there's lots of virtual tours you can do on YouTube of particularly Australians going over there and doing drugs in the prison, going on the tour and just posting it on YouTube. And so, the government's always said this is all that book's a lie, it's not true. And then
despite irrefutable evidence.
Yeah, there's pretty irrefutable evidence out there.
Bolivia, it's Bolivia.
That's right.
Bolivian government just do what they want, and who's gonna crack down on them? It's the Bolivian government that runs the prison cell. The prison.
The surprising thing for me was that the local press hadn't really done a big expose on it ever. And obviously when this book came out, then they became more interested in it. And one Saturday night, I think it was about 7:30 at night, they set up a sort of false raid, and the news channel set up a camera just outside the side entrance, and then they called a raid through the main entrance. Then they filmed 70 tourists running out at 9:30 on a Saturday night, running out high on cocaine. And they're like, okay, so what were all these 70 tourists doing inside the prison on a Saturday night? Like, were they just visiting, really?
Well, that's
They're all family and friends.
I think now periodically they do a crackdown.
Yeah.
Because when I was over there, which was 2011, early 2011, I went there, and only about a week before I got there, there'd been a group of 12 and a group of 14 that had been deported out of Bolivia because of being in the prison. And then, so we got there and I tried to get in. I lost some money from somebody just being a shyster. I had to pay him, then meet him the next day or whatever. I was telling Tommy, we saw the chick who took our money. That was like equivalent of 100 Australian dollars. It was a lot of money. Yeah. But we're like, this is our only chance. We got to trust this chick. And she ended up, I saw her out the front of the prison. She'd ripped us off one day, and I went back there the next day and she was there. And I said, hey, you owe me some money. And then she said something really snappy to me in Spanish with a real mean look on her face. And then I looked around. This was in the park out the front of the prison. And I looked around and I could see all these big, heavy-looking Bolivian dudes. And I knew that she knew every one of them. And she just kind of walked past us. And I said to my mate, Matt, I said, what do we do, man? He goes,
let it go.
Let her go. Definitely let her go.
That's awesome.
But so for us, when I was over there, there was a month-long crackdown. So it was basically for the month, no, you can't do it anymore, you can't get in the prison. And then as soon as I left Bolivia, because we hung around, I was out the front loitering on the phone to guys on the inside who just kept trying to sell me coke through their kid. Their kid was coming up to me and
you mentioned that. That's right.
They were selling coke through the prison gates with their child. And then I left, and then a couple of days after I left, my mate Simon got in there. They'd opened it up, and he did the tour. Did the San Pedro prison tour or whatever. So I think they're still doing the 3 monthly crackdown and making examples of people.
Is it a crackdown in quotation marks, or is it a crackdown? Let's be honest here.
Or is it a crackdown?
Or is it a crackdown? Everyone's just still a crack.
There's a sign out just outside saying no foreign visitors allowed for tourist purposes, which to my mind is almost an admission that used to be the case officially, But I think what they do is they say that it's illegal, but then people get in unofficially, then it grows, and then there's a bust, and then you can't do it. So, but there's still tourism in San Pedro, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to get on to your next book shortly, but let's just finish off with the Marching Powder movie. What's the status of it? Because for me, I've been so excited for it for so long, and there's always been these rumours, and then. Is it official, or you sold the rights?
So we sold what's called the option. So basically, that gives them the right but not the obligation to make the film. So it's typically a year or 18-month option. And at the end of that period, the rights come back to the author, being me. Okay. So we did sell it at one stage to a company called Plan B, which was owned by Brad Pitt.
Yep.
And they had the actor Don Cheadle listed to play Thomas.
Be good, Tommy.
That didn't go through. And then at the moment, the rights are with a studio called New Regency, which is one of the big Hollywood studios, and the actor Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's I think he's Nigerian-born English actor who was in 12 Years a Slave.
He's a fantastic
really amazing actor.
Oh.
Yeah, he was in quite a few amazing movies, including Dirty Pretty Things was one of his big breakouts.
I think he's in. Is he in The Martian too? He's in The Martian.
Well, how do we spell his first name? I'm just trying to look him up here.
Chiwetel, Chiwetel. Hope I'm pronouncing it.
Oh man,
yeah,
I love this guy.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he?
He's an Oscar-nominated actor. He's really talented. So so he's really, and he would make an amazing Thomas.
Yeah, right. Yep.
So that's where it's at. Fingers crossed it gets made.
Man,
that would be insane.
It's a bit of a leap of faith when you sell your movie rights to Hollywood. It sounds great, like wow, I sold the movie rights, but
screw it up.
Sometimes it can take, it's taken 15 years and it still hasn't been made.
Sure.
So,
and it's the same with I was talking to you earlier about Shantaram. Your book and Shantaram, two of my all-time favourite books, and the rights to Shantaram have been sold, and rumours floated around left, right, and centre, and that's just never been made. It's just, and then sometimes a book will get made and it'll come out, and the movie's just really subpar, and you're like, fuck, exactly all that time. Like The Iceman, a gangster movie. Polish
started reading that,
shipman.
actually.
It's a great book. Polish shipman in New York that did all the hits for the Five Families through like the 80s and 90s. It's a great book. Mm-hmm. One of my favourite books, and it got made into like a C grade movie, and it broke my heart.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But,
Fingers crossed here.
yeah, hopefully it goes ahead. So, have you got any
Yeah, I've got
good,
some
bad, and
GBS.
science, Tommy?
Yeah, so one of our segments here on the show, Russ, is we do the good, the bad, and the science. So some current affairs stuff, something good, something not so good, and then something sciencey, because Bill and I love our science, but we're not overly smart. So hopefully you can help us out here. All right, the good. Strange things people try to take on airplanes. Clearly I've practiced this one. Okay, so let's have a listen. Last week, American security guards collected a record of 67 firearms from carry-on bags across the US. 56 of those guns were loaded. They also found a bunch of throwing stars, 19 stun guns and tasers, and a canister of gunpowder. So pretty bizarre. It actually may come to a surprise to Australians, but the TSA says you can travel with your firearms in checked baggage, but they first must be declared on the airline. Now, I wanted to ask you guys what the craziest item you guys have ever tried to smuggle or just thought it was appropriate to travel on an airplane. I was telling Bill before that I went away to the US just the end of last year, and I get pretty stinky. So I brought with myself 5 deodorant cans, and they sort of looked at me and they're like, "You can't be serious, can you?" Like, oh, what's the go here? So it's like, how am I going to? I'm going to be stinky for the next 6 months. That's all right. Have you any taken a gun or a sword, mate?
No, I don't own any guns or swords, but probably the thing I got stopped with was traveling out of the US back to Colombia, and one of my friends and bosses and the work at my job at the time gave me a bottle of Grange Hermitage, and I just wasn't thinking at the time, and I just took it in my carry-on rather than checking it in.
Yeah.
And I got there and they just took it out and said, "Sorry, sir, this has to go." And he's holding this bottle of Grange Hermitage above a rubbish bin. And I'm like, no. Yeah. He's like, "Sir, you're going to miss your flight." And I'm just like, I was just trying to think, how much did that flight cost versus how much is this bottle? And it was only 7 a.m. I was like, "No, give me that bottle back.
Yeah.
I'm going back to."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm like, I think I'll miss the flight. And I was pretty lucky in that it was a Colombian airline, and I sort of made friends with the check-in staff and said, "Hey, can you get this? I'm sorry, this is what's happened. Can you take this onto the plane? This is worth a lot of money." Because the other option was, drink it, scull a bottle of Grange Hermitage at 7 a.m.
Real classy.
Really classy. But I wasn't going to let it get chucked in the bin either. So
My dad
you got to drink it in the end?
yeah, it was really good. I kept it with me, and it was a really nice bottle.
My dad tried to bring up, when you talked about this earlier, I didn't have anything, but my dad tried to get a crossbow in from Indonesia to Australia, and he took it apart and put it in pieces, and we got taken through customs. My dad wasn't even freaking out. They opened up his bag and they said, "What's this, sir?" And he goes, "Oh no, it's just a crossbow. It's just for ornamental sake."
Yeah.
And they looked at him and said, "Sir, this is a deadly weapon."
Yeah, that's right.
You haven't declared it. And Dad was like, "Oh," and then so we just got rifled through absolutely everything through customs. Pretty stupid move.
So what did he actually want? He just wanted for an ornament.
Yeah, just hanging on the wall.
Okay, I like that.
What do you got?
Alrighty. The bad. The man who cut off his ears to look like a parrot. A man who had his face and eyeballs tattooed to look like his pet parrots has gone a step further by cutting off his ears. Englishman Ted Richards, they should make a movie about this one. Englishman Ted Richards, who's 56, is obsessed by pet carrots. Eli, Takea, Tinme, Jake and Bubby, and has his face tattooed with colourful feathers. But the animal nut, who has 110 tattoos, 50 piercings and a split tongue, has taken this obsession one step further and has had both his ears removed and is planning to find a surgeon prepared to turn his nose into a beak. Now, this is probably to the nth degree, but if you guys could be any animal, what would you be and why?
That's a tough one.
That's bizarre, isn't it? I'd be an eagle. I'd always wanted to be an eagle. Yep. Dad was an eagle. Cool. Mum was an eagle. I came out weird, but I've always wanted to fly.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool to fly.
I reckon cats have got it pretty easy, They sort of just turn up for meal times and then go off and sleep.
Smoke a shit ton of crack.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the big cat. I'd definitely go the lion.
The lion?
Yeah, just walk around with a massive ego. Wouldn't fuck with anyone because I'm pretty happy-go-lucky guy, but just know that, if I wanted to, which I can't at the moment, totally given to me right now, I could just fuck with anyone.
Yeah. Well, this is going to go on to our next topic in the science, but they actually think that the Sphinx was a line that was made about 10,500 years ago. Because if you have a look at the Sphinx, I think I touch on this in the next segment, but the Sphinx, the actual Sphinx head of the pharaoh who they made it after, is so much smaller than the actual size of the Sphinx, and that actually sort of coincides to this line shape that could definitely have been what it was. Anyway, the science. So the Great Pyramids of Giza contain enough stone to make an almost 2-foot high wall around the Earth. So that is a fact, guys. I've been doing a bit of. This isn't actually a news story. This is just something I want to throw in there. I remember when I called you a couple of weeks ago, Bill, just saying that I had basically spent a day. I spent half the day reading marching powder and the other half the day studying Graham Hancock stuff, which is I'm a big fan of Graham Hancock. He's just an unconventional scientist and theorist. So this is going off this. So turns out that the pyramids of Giza aren't as young as we all have been taught, or what I believe anyway. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the pyramids were built somewhere around 10,500 BC, approximately 8,000 years earlier than what is preconceived. So there's some bits of information that I've got here, guys. The first one is that the three pyramids of Giza line up perfectly and accurately with the constellation of Orion. That was apparent around 13,000 years ago. The mathematics of the constructions are almost beyond current technology. And a further argument suggesting that they're not all that they appear is that despite popular belief and that these were tombs, no tomb has ever been found. Now, there's a lot of theories about how they came to be, aliens, all that sort of stuff. I like the aliens one. I think that's pretty bloody cool. What do you guys think? Bill, do you have a thought on this?
I don't have a particular thought on who built the pyramids or why they were built, but I will say that I think Graham Hancock has a lot of theories that there was a cataclysmic event 12,000 years ago, Rusty, that wiped out civilizations that were much more advanced than we believe. Right. This is his theory, right? And I think that the fact that the pyramids were built to such an extent at the time that they were built, whether it was 4,000 years ago, whether it was 12,000 years ago, I think whoever built the pyramids were a lot more further advanced than we probably give them credit for.
Amazing astronomers and mathematicians.
Yeah, and isn't there that stat that if the pyramids are half an inch out on block at the base of the pyramid, then the pyramids are never going to get built. They're built with such,
It's 52 degrees around the base, and they had a perfect understanding of pi as well, all this sort of stuff. It's amazing. I have an understanding of pi, but I don't think it's the same one.
Yeah, I've been to those pyramids, so I still think that there are. Yeah, I think I definitely remember seeing some sarcophagi inside. I think there was Tutankhamun's. I still believe the traditional theories behind behind the pyramids that they actually were used as tombs. Actually being inside the pyramids and you see the burial rooms and so on.
That's a fair, good bit of evidence.
That's pretty good. But one thing that
we're just going off news articles on the web.
I got this from Reddit.
One thing that definitely tripped me out in South America. This is about ancient civilizations. There's this place called the Nazca Lines, and it's in Peru, and it's basically out in the desert. And there are these incredible sketches done in the desert that are kilometres long. I think the biggest ones might be 4 kilometres long. So when you're right down there on ground level, you can't actually see it. It just looks like a kind of like a little small trench, I guess. Yeah. But if you get up in the air, you can see these animals. Like there's a hummingbird. There's all these sort of strange, strange geometrical shapes. Yeah. Drawn in the desert. So who did them and why? And obviously at the time they didn't have planes.
That's the most important part.
That's the thing.
Yeah, so they didn't have planes at the time. So who were they doing them for? Were they venerating the stars? Were they writing messages to aliens? I'll tell you what, there's all sorts of different theories, but it's pretty hard to explain it when you see these things from the air. Like you go, how the hell and why did they do this? That was quite trippy.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that may coincide with this theory that we were quite advanced before this cataclysmic event. There's if you go sort of, I think it's Central America. Where are the Mayans? Are they south? They're south.
Mayans are Central America.
Mayans are Central America. Yeah, Central America. I'm pretty sure, and I'd have to study up again to sound a little bit more professional than I do now, but there are these... Pseudoscience,
Rusty, please forgive us.
Pseudoscience. This is why we have this in here. There are these sketches And so, obviously the Mayans, ancient civilizations, all this sort of stuff. If we're going with the fact that Christopher Columbus discovered the continent of America, and when he did, these guys lived thousands of years before he was around. And there are these sketches of big sort of Mayan faces, and amongst all the rubble there are these Caucasian sketches and white dudes with big beards and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, Caucasians were never there before Christopher Columbus discovered the continent, so what's going on here? There's tons of stuff like that where I want to know.
Well, Christopher Columbus took over the continent, I suppose.
So when was it discovered?
What's that? Well, how many people failed in doing that? Arrived to land and then, gotten wiped out by the natives.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, well.
Excellent.
Good stuff. Good stuff. The Nazca lines, actually, when I was in Peru, we had 3 of us, and 2 of us, myself and my mate were absolutely 100% one of the most exciting things I was going to do on my whole South America trip. And then there was another mate, Royzy, who I mentioned before. He went to get in the prison with me, and we couldn't all fit on the one flight. So Royzy, because he was kind of bigger than Royzy, his weight fit better in the plane before. So he got in the plane before, and it was starting to get a little bit windy and choppy and stuff. He didn't want to. He was like, this will be all right, whatever. Few lines in the ground. Anyway, he went and did the flight. He came back and he was like, oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Check ourselves in, walk over to the flight. We sit in the plane, and then I hear,
cancelled.
Yeah. I can't do flight in Spanish.
Este vuelo está cancelado.
Yeah. So we've heard that, and I because I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but I could basically make out what was going on, and Woz looked at me. We're sitting in our seats. Woz looked at me and goes, what's going on, man?
No.
I said, it's done.
No good.
It's done.
So you missed it.
Aeropuerto es cerrado. Yeah, the airport is closed.
That is correct. That is correct, by the way.
That is
how you say it.
Cheers, mate. So, Rusty, your next book's Colombiano. Firstly, when you moved to write the book to Colombia, why did you choose Colombia above other nations?
Basically, I bribed Thomas out of prison at the end of Marching Powder. The judges kept his passport so that he basically couldn't leave the continent. Mm-hmm. So we needed to go somewhere that wasn't Bolivia, because we had to sort of skedaddle out of Bolivia, and we needed to go somewhere we could work. And I had heard that there was work available as an English teacher in Bogota, so that was where we went to.
Okay.
So it was basically economic necessity, and ended up going there and absolutely loving the place.
Yeah.
Just my favourite country in the world apart from Australia.
Oh, it's an amazing country. I didn't get to Bogota. I went to Medellin and Cartagena, but Medellin's top notch. I love that place. But all right. Well, let's talk about your next book, Colombiano. Obviously, you've given us a copy, but we haven't. Obviously, we received it today, so we haven't had a chance to read it. Why don't you tell us the premise and a little bit about it and what made you write it?
Yeah, so I lived in Colombia for 7 or 8 years. The first year of which I was writing Marching Powder, and I just loved it so much. I ended up staying there, and I was like, I want to write my next book about this country.
Yeah. I
certainly didn't think it was going to take this long to write another book. Yeah. The first one took 1 year to write, and 6 months to edit. This one's taken about 8 years. Yes. But
8 times better book.
we don't know. The jury's
in the Bible.
The jury's not in yet. So I just started interviewing people. Obviously Colombia was a relatively dangerous country at the time. Had one of the highest murder rates on the planet, 30,000 people per year in a country of 40 million.
Yep.
There were 8 kidnaps on average per day.
Yep.
3 million internally displaced people, and the largest standing insurgency army in the Western Hemisphere. So the FARC, communist guerrilla, had, I believe, between 17 and 20,000 troops. And obviously a major centre for drug trafficking. Probably 80% of the world's cocaine comes out of Colombia. So
sounds pretty
there
safe.
Was plenty of sort of interesting stories to be told in Colombia. And so I started interviewing just people about trying to understand what the war was about, what had started it. And Colombia also, everyone's heard about child soldiers in Africa, but Colombia is the country with the second highest number of child soldiers in the world.
Really?
So that became the kind of focus of my next book, was interviewing child soldiers from the 2 or 3 armed groups there, either active child soldiers or former child soldiers, about their lives, why they joined up, what their experiences were like inside these terrorist organisations. and how they were adjusting to life on the outside. So I ended up sort of interviewing dozens of them. I also interviewed undercover police officers. I interviewed people who had been kidnapped, their families, soldiers, and just trying to get sort of a picture of what was going on in Colombia, like why there was a war on and what it was all about. And so the next book, Colombiano, is basically telling the story of a guy called Pedro who witnesses his father's brutal execution, and then he goes off and joins a terrorist organisation in order to get revenge against his father's killers and track them down one by one. So it's fiction, but the research was so detailed that I think people get a sense, as with Marching Powder, of the setting and the characters and the events feel very real.
Yeah. Did you have any direct experiences with these dangers yourself?
Look, obviously going out into the field to interview people, going into war zones and stuff, it can be pretty dangerous.
Absolutely.
I was pretty lucky to have just missed a bomb went off in the street in Bogota. I was about 15 metres away. It wasn't a big bomb, but it perforated my eardrums and stuff. So
wow,
15 metres away from any bomb's going to scare the pants out.
Yeah. Like I was in shock, and eardrums got blown and stuff. So there were bombs going off all the time, and people getting killed, people getting kidnapped, and so dangers. I don't want to exaggerate it. Colombia is a great country. They've just yesterday they announced a peace accord, so it's a very different country to travel to now than it was 15 years ago when I first went there, at which point it was considered the world's most dangerous country in the world. So, I really, really loved it, but there were definitely going around asking questions of drug traffickers and leaders of terrorist organisations is a bit of a dangerous enterprise.
Yeah. So, what year? This is 2000, basically.
2001.
2001. So, my memory just evades me. When was Pablo Escobar reigning terror over Colombia?
Escobar was in the 80s, and he was killed in 1994.
1994. Okay, so 6 or 7 years after the Medellin cartel was. Yeah. So what was the war going on in Colombia? What was the reason behind so much war and so much?
Okay,
terror?
there's been a long history of violence. In fact, there was a whole period of Colombian history called La Violencia. But around 1964, 1965, when communism was still considered to be a viable, alternative political system, the Colombian FARC arose out of the peasant classes, and basically they formed peasant militias, and then they united into a communist insurgency aiming to overthrow the central government. That war continued on as a kind of low-intensity war until the early 90s, at which point cocaine trafficking really allowed them to increase their levels of funding, and along with kidnapping. So the taxation of cocaine, kidnapping and extortion were their primary sources of funding, and that allowed them to import more weapons, buy more bullets, and recruit more soldiers. And that was really the point where the war ramped up. And obviously with the dismantling of the Medellin cartel and then the extradition of the leaders of the Cali cartel, you had a huge power vacuum because the demand for cocaine hadn't shifted at all. In fact, it was increasing on a worldwide level. Mm-hmm. And so the supply side, who was going to take it over? So at that point, you have the rise of two major terrorist organizations who are listed on the US government's FTO list, Foreign Terrorist Organization. Mm-hmm. And they were amongst the three wealthiest terrorist organizations at the time, along with the Taliban, who's primarily funded through poppy plantations. So the FARC and the Colombian Alta Defenses were basically making millions and millions of dollars from taxing cocaine or manufacturing it directly themselves. So they were really what came in place, or what came after the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fair.
So how did you, after interviewing all these different characters and trying to find the root of why all this stuff was going on, why did you settle on Pedro to tell his story?
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed scores of people around the country, but all from different parts of the country. So the difficulty for me was then, how do I tell this, again, all these little small anecdotes from different parts of the country, different people, different ages, different social groups, and put it into one story? and I decided just to focus on one of the stories, and then used all the other ones, kind of weave them into a narrative, into a fictional narrative. So I think the most appealing stories for me are first-person narrative stories, and I really wanted to tell. It's pretty hard to tell the story of a country without being sort of too historical and dry and boring. So I think it's best to tell the story loosely of a country, but through the eyes of an individual, through telling the telling of one person's life. So it basically takes his life from a fairly idyllic country kid who's growing up on a farm and hardworking, has got his future ahead of him, and then that's all taken from him, and then he ends up joining the war, and how that radically changes his life and the life of his family members and the life of his town.
Makes it a lot more real, doesn't it? It really puts you in there in the backyard.
Yeah, I mean, I can quote, obviously, part of the research I did. I've got a lot of statistics and figures and historical facts that I could put into a book. But when you start talking about 3 million internally displaced people, when you start seeing lots of zeros, people switch off and start going, what's the meaning of 3 million people? It's pretty hard to imagine.
How does it affect one person?
That's right.
Tell us a story.
It's hard enough to envisage 80,000 people in the MCG, right?
Yeah.
So I think people relate to individual stories a lot better than they do to facts and figures, and I think that's also one of the major differences between fiction and non-fiction. Is fiction sort of tells the story, it aims to sort of strike at your heart. It's about the emotions that you can create. So that was essentially why I chose one story and one person's narrative to kind of increase the impact for readers and increase their enjoyment, their entertainment, but also hopefully allow them to learn something about Colombia, because it's a fascinating and tragic country, but also a very beautiful one with amazing people, as you know yourself from having travelled there.
For sure. So, because Marching Powder, let's just be clear about that. Marching Powder is non-fiction.
Marching Powder is completely non-fiction, and it's set in Bolivia, and this one is fiction, but based around some pretty intensive research.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of like Shantaran, which I mentioned before, which is loosely based on stories and amalgamated into a fiction story. Did you set out to write a fiction novel, or
No,
you just?
So look, I don't think I knew what I was doing at the beginning. I was just trying to collect as many stories as possible, and they were all fascinating, so I kind of wanted to include them all, but they weren't necessarily related because they were from different parts of the country, different people, who didn't know each other. So how do you tell the story of one person whose family member gets kidnapped, another person who joins the communist group, another person who knows about cocaine submarines in this part of the country? How do you weave all those stories into a non-fiction story? Well, I guess I could have written small chapters of non-fiction, but it wouldn't have had
A narrative.
It wouldn't have had an overall narrative, So that's why I decided to switch from non-fiction to fiction.
Is that was that a big decision for you as a writer? Obviously, you're a non-fiction writer. I mean, then you go. Isn't it a whole other realm of?
It's a whole different level.
You're not telling a story. You're creating a piece of art that it's more on you as well.
Exactly. I mean, I sort of thought the skills would be transferable. If you can write non-fiction, you can just write fiction, right? I think fiction is a completely different beast. It's a lot harder. I'd say about 10 times harder.
Why is that?
Well, because you have to make it up.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Basically. I mean, the thing is with non-fiction, there's obviously, it still requires levels of skill, in crafting a story and choosing the facts and choosing how to tell it, keeping engaging readers' interest, and writing using good language. But the bottom line is with non-fiction is, you're really limited by the truth, and that can be frustrating because you'd be like, wouldn't it be better if the story ended this way?
Yeah, that's
but
right.
It didn't.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there are far fewer choices to make in non-fiction, even though there are a lot of choices. Whereas fiction, potentially the only limit is your own imagination, which is great. It sounds great, but that also makes you doubt yourself a lot more because then it puts a lot more responsibility onto you as a writer.
And if you can't make entertaining entertaining fiction, then
what can you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, people are fond of saying truth is stranger than fiction, right? But if you think about it, why would anyone want to read a fiction story that was less interesting than a true story? So in fact, with fiction, you actually have to use your imagination to push the boundaries of human experience beyond beyond reality, but also keep it limited to something which is at least appears to be realistic. So it's a really, really fine line, and every single line of dialogue, every single decision that every character makes is a creative decision. So it's just a lot more. There's just a lot more creativity in fiction than non-fiction.
And I guess as well, talking about that pressure, do you do you, on a more general sense, feel some of that with the release of this new book based on the success of Marching Powder?
Yeah, I think I would have felt a lot of pressure if I'd released this next book within 5 years of the first one. But it's now been such a long time.
Everyone's waiting on the edge of their seat.
Rusty young.
Rusty who?
Rusty old.
Marching what?
Rusty relatively old.
Yeah.
Rusty older.
Rusty at a good age.
Rusty middle age. So look, the main pressure I feel is obviously, having put my heart and soul and passion into this for the best part of a decade, and also just on a personal level, I'm very, I'm a very driven person. So I guess I'm competing against myself to see whether I could do this, and I won't know because I've now lost perspective. I've been working on this book for so long that I don't know whether it's good, and I don't know whether it could just fall flat or people might love it like they like the first one.
We'll tell you next week, mate.
Yeah, we will. We definitely will.
So you're on track for October, you said, to release.
It looks like it might get pushed back till the following year because I've just missed my deadline. So
yes. Okay. Cool. So early next year, people can expect Colombiano?
March 2017 at the latest.
Okay, that's cool. Yep. And then what happens after you? I mean, it's obviously this is only your second book, so you don't have a huge database to go off. But like after you write a book, especially after Colombiano, you've spent how many years? Do you have to? Because I know that you plan to write more books, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But will you need to have, as a writer, do you need a mental, do you need a deload for 2 years or 3 years to just relax or how's it work?
I mean, I've been working for 8 years on this one pretty much full time, and apart from anything, I'm out of money, right? So this had better do well.
If you have any money, just send it through to Adventure Radio and we'll pass it on.
We're sitting on a mattress on the floor in my parents' house.
This is art.
This is a struggling artist. So look, I would ideally love to, take a break and go back to what I love doing, which is traveling and writing and doing it for myself. Because there's a point where, it's a perfect life where you can make money and your profession is what your passion is. Like, so I love writing, but there is also a point where it becomes a job, it becomes a chore, and it becomes, not enjoyable because it's just getting up and doing something every day as an exercise in discipline. So I would love to just take a big break from writing and go travelling again if I can afford to do so.
What about, have you ever thought of, obviously you're a very skilled writer and people know you. Have you ever thought about just travel blogging or writing for certain companies? Surely there'd be offers on the table there if you wanted to go through certain
I guess I'll have to see how, my ideal is just to write my own stories as I, to do what I want to do. And if I can afford to do that, then hopefully I won't have to go out and try and
find work,
prostitute myself to a blog site.
Intrepid Travel.
But if I...
You can write for us. I saw you looking for the t-shirt. You can write for Adventure Travel.
Adventure Travel, yeah, there we go.
Our blog gets read by 30 people.
So if the option is there if I get a following with this next book, then I write another novel, and if not, then I've got to find other ways to survive.
And have you got so with this travel, will that try and be the basis of your next novel, or have you got ideas of where you're going to go next, or where you're going to go next with your writing, or?
Look, I've still got so much material on the Colombian one that if people are interested in the Colombian book, I've only told one side of the story.
For sure.
I could easily write another novel or two about Colombia, but who knows? If I go traveling, I might get inspired and want to write about Nepal or China or Russia. Or there's just so many stories out there, and you just got to go out and find them.
So that's awesome.
So okay, so where's the next part of your world you want to go to?
I've been spending a lot of time in the Philippines recently, so I love, my big passion is kiteboarding, so I'll just take my kiteboard everywhere, and that's basically where I've been choosing where to live based upon the wind.
Yeah, cool. Where do you get to on the Philippines?
So there's an island called Boracay.
We're going there in November.
How's that?
Here we go, guys. We've just announced Rusty Young is kiteboarding instructor on the Adventure Travel November Philippines trip.
Yeah, so I probably spent 4 months a year in Philippines, in Boracay every year. And before that I was in a place called Montenegro in the Balkans, Croatia, did some kiteboarding there. South of Spain, Tarifa.
Okay.
Just basically wherever there's wind, I'll just take my kiteboard and set up, rent a place and write.
That's cool.
Excellent.
And are you pretty happy? I mean, for me, like I said very early on when I started telling the Bill Kerr story, for me, traveling totally 100% changed my life. Do you look back and think like how lucky you are that, I mean, we're talking about you're a writer that's we're at your mum and dad's house making jokes about that and stuff. But at the end of the day, for me, 100%. At the end of your life, you don't end up with all the money. You want to end up with all the stories.
Yeah.
That's the person that's the richer person. So you feel like you're lucky that you're able to? Because so many people that don't have the chance, they don't have that light bulb moment where they make this decision to see the world and travel the world and have these experiences.
Yeah, look, I think my answer would be different now as opposed to 6 months, as opposed to 6 months henceforth. Like this time last year when I'd been working on this book for 7 years, I showed it to the publisher and I said, look, this is unpublishable. We can't release this. And I was like, I've just spent 7 years of my life passionately dedicated to, one work of art that I thought was really good. It was that I was put my heart and soul into it, and I was just going, oh, I got it wrong, as in I've made a mistake about how to live 7 years of my life.
Oh, right.
And then obviously now I've found a publisher and it's going to come out shortly. And right now, I see a lot of my friends married and happy and they've got a lot more stable life than I do. So when I guess it's inevitable that you're going to compare yourself with other people, right? So if whenever I'm back in Australia, I go, oh shit, it's so expensive to live here. I can't really afford to live here.
Yeah.
If I had stayed here, I'd be, making a lot more money, or maybe
Lawyers make some money.
Lawyers
makes money, yeah.
I'll make some money, but then when I'm overseas and I'm, exploring new countries, learning new languages, following my passion, doing my writing, doing my kiteboarding, mountain biking, adventuring, I'm like, there's nothing, I wouldn't change this for the world. So I think
100%.
I think a lot of it's about how you're feeling about yourself at the time and whether you made the right decisions. And a year from now, when this book's off my plate, I think I'll go, pat in the back. But right now, I'm still feeling a little bit like I'm not sure whether I've made the right life choices. It's a tough path to follow to be an artist.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And what about,
Absolutely.
Just touching back on what you just mentioned, like, taking one of your earlier drafts to a publisher and them saying, sorry, it's no good. Like, what's the mental, does that put you into a deep freaking
depression?
Yeah.
What is that?
Absolutely, yeah. I went, I was out of money.
It's like getting a divorce, it's like that's it's that work or like your love life, and it's you're married to the piece, I would imagine, and it's just, that would be a huge.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, effectively, my book was probably I'm not married, but that was pretty much my child, I guess. That was my marriage. I was married to my book and my work, and you put your heart and soul into something, and then obviously when you're in your positive frame of mind, you're like, this could change the world. People are going to love this. People are going to be entertained by this. People are going to laugh and cry. And on your negative days, you go, this is absolutely crap. No one wants to read it. No one's going to want to read it. And then to have that confirmed by, inverted commas, industry experts saying this is, quote unquote, unpublishable, just confirms all your worst fears and paranoias and makes you go, I'm useless. I've made bad decisions in my life. This is terrible. And it threw me into like a big tailspin. And I have a tendency to go out drinking and partying and stuff. And so I went into a bit of a negative, self-destructive spiral for a while there. Got myself out of it. I always get myself out of my negative spirals by doing running and cycling. I find fitness and just it's kind of like my form of meditation, I guess.
For sure.
I got myself back on track and just went, you know what? That's just one person's opinion or one company's opinion. If I'd listened to other people, I would never have followed the path I have followed. And so I picked myself back up and went traveling again, and then found a publisher, and hopefully it's all back on track now. But that's the risk, is that you follow a path and you don't get there.
Hey, just quickly, you mentioned before the show how much that physical aspect of your life helps with the mental, I guess not struggle, but the ability to keep going and writing. Did you use a lot of that when you were in Colombia?
Yeah. Colombia's, Bogota anyways, is a little bit polluted, so it's not the greatest place to be going jogging and stuff, but they do produce a lot of really good cyclists because it's up in the top of the Andes. It's 2,600 meters above sea level. Yeah. So, and there's obviously huge hills and stuff. That's their real strong national sport is cycling. So, I did a lot of cycling. Every Sunday in Bogota, they close all the main streets and have something called Ciclovia, which is like a really beautiful community day. Imagine all the major streets of Melbourne or Sydney were shut down. People go jogging, cycling, rollerblading, walking.
Really?
Yeah, just
Awesome.
That's
from
amazing.
From
That's
7
awesome.
a.m. until 2 p.m. The streets are shut down, and obviously people, motorists get annoyed because they can't drive across the main streets. But it's like, hang on.
It's true, you guys get a bike.
Yeah.
Like it's a kind of a fitness, it's like a
Should be.
citywide fitness day.
Yeah,
And
we
should
so
have that.
was
How
awesome.
often was that, did you say?
Every Sunday.
We should have that. We should have
That's
that.
amazing.
Yeah, every Sunday that was Ciclovia, and then obviously I'd go to the gym a lot. I'd cycle, I'd go jogging and stuff. So, and I love wakeboarding and wherever possible windsurfing and
Beautiful.
kiteboarding. So, yeah, I find there's a very high correlation between physical fitness and mental fitness. So when I'm really on my game with my riding, I'm doing a lot of jogging, a lot of cycling, go to the gym, and then when I'm feeling pretty bad about my book is when I start slackening off and stop going to the gym
You party and
start drinking and start my diet will go out and then I actually find that my writing, the quality of my writing and my efficiency in my writing, my productivity drops off quite significantly. And the temptation is to go, I need to spend more time writing. But in fact, the best thing I can do when I'm going through a non-productive part of the cycle is actually get back out there and do lots of fitness. And then you get back on top of it mentally. There's a huge correlation, I think, between fitness and self-discipline.
Yeah,
Sure.
I guess it's just the only thing that's hard about it is when you're writing about someone that's constantly feeding you drugs in a prison in South America.
I wasn't doing many marathons when I was in prison. I'll tell you that. I wasn't doing many running marathons anyway.
Mate, when I was in Bolivia, we touched down. We got off a bus, so we didn't fly in, so it was better. We kind of dealt with the altitude a little bit on the way up. We'd been in Peru and stuff. But when I got to Bolivia, we got out of the bus and we were walking the streets and we were puffed out.
Yeah.
Like my mate Matt would be going. I said, "What's wrong?" Because I wasn't really getting altitude. I wasn't getting too badly affected, but my mate just got hit for 6, and we'd be walking the streets just. It's incredible what it does to you. I couldn't imagine trying to ride a bike in Colombia or do any sort of exercise in Bolivia.
a lot of the Latin American soccer teams will go up to Bolivia and do their training in the Altiplano, which is up at sort of 4,000 meters. Because if you can get fit and run around it with such thin oxygen, when you go back down to sea level, your blood system becomes really oxygen rich. In fact, so you're going to be far fitter than the other team. So that they often do a lot of training there.
Yeah, it's cool. What do you reckon, Tommy? Should we go to 6 from 6?
I think we should.
6 from 6.
Yeah.
What is 6 from 6?
It's not going to be 6 from 6 though, because 6 from 6 is normally it's basically 6 rapid fire-ish questions from me and Tommy, but I don't want them to be rapid fire today. I'd like to get into this travel side of it, if you mind to travel, and I think we can delve a little bit deeper.
Yes.
What do you got, Tommy? Are you
Do you want to flip things up massively?
Yeah.
And have me go first.
Yeah, go for it.
This is big. This has never been done.
World.
This is a normal part of this is the typical part of the segment, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, this has never been done before on Adventure Radio, where I will talk first. Here we go. Alrighty, Rusty. Who were some of your role models growing up, if you had any, or some big inspirations?
Yeah, obviously my parents are huge role models for me. They're both really hardworking and really supportive. They backed me with my writing career, but at the same time encouraged me to have a backup plan in case it didn't work out. Also, my Year 7 English teacher, his name was Michael Boyle, and he was the one who sort of gave me some initial encouragement to become a writer. He said, "Yeah, you've got some talent there. Try and follow it up." So I'd say my parents and my Year 7 English teacher.
Beautiful, excellent. Shout out to was it Michael Boylan?
Yep.
Beautiful. Shout out to Michael Boylan. He's a big adventure fitter, isn't he? So he'll be listening.
One of the boys.
Yeah. What are some things I guess you've got a bit more downtime than you have over the past 8 years now, but what are some things you like to do when you're relaxing apart from being physical?
Yeah, so I've never really been a relaxed person. I'm always like a switched on person. I have real trouble sleeping. So my form of, I guess, relaxation is going out and smashing myself physically. So going for a 60K cycle or
I think I just got too excited.
I'll jog a half marathon to relax, and people go, that's what relaxes me. It's like,
wow.
And that allows me to go to sleep, basically.
Yeah.
So for fun, drinking and kiteboarding.
Cool, love it. There's 2 complete opposite ends of the spectrum there. That's good. Relaxed and pissed. Now, final one. I'm really pumped about this one. If you could invite 3 people to dinner, dead or alive.
Dead or alive.
Yeah, dead or alive. Who would they be and why? And just bearing in mind that your family's already there, and anyone you kind of want to be there as well. In addition, is there. Obviously, Bill and I will be there.
Obviously, yeah, you guys are two of the
That's
three.
right. You got one to go.
You can have a seat too, mate.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a screenplay writer called Aaron Sorkin. He did The West Wing. He did Charlie Wilson's War. He did The Social Network, and I really admire the way he writes his dialogue, and I'd really love to meet him and get inspired by him. He used to have he's a pretty interesting guy, but he also used to have a massive crack problem, I think. Yeah. So I mean, if you've ever seen the speed of the dialogues that he has in all his movies, it's just like
makes perfect sense.
Your head starts to spin. But there's one story where he was going through LAX, and this guy's, I think he was on a 4-movie deal with Paramount for $15 million. Like this, so this is a super smart, super educated, sophisticated guy. He walked through LAX metal detector with a crack pipe in his pocket and 10 grams of crack, and they sort of said, "So what?" He's like, "Oh yeah, okay." You got
Can't
me.
take this?
I think, what do you mean I can't smoke crack on a plane? I've got a meeting. I've got to be high for it.
Yeah,
but
that's illegal.
Yeah, so that's one person. Who else? Oh no, I have to come back to that. I need to think about that one.
Yeah, cool. So, my questions are travel related, Rusty. I normally ask our guests if they're a well-travelled person. Obviously, don't need to ask that today. So, my first question is, what's your favourite destination on the planet and why? And we may have already touched on it.
Yeah, definitely my favourite country apart from Australia is Colombia. Absolutely love it. People are so friendly. It's not at all like its reputation. There are some dangers, but those are abating right now. They've just signed a peace agreement with the rebels yesterday, actually. And just super friendly, really diverse. I love the language. The landscapes are incredible. And just above all, the people are just so friendly. They've just got a real passion for life that you won't find in any other country. Right now, I love the Philippines, really friendly.
Yep.
I actually really liked Russia. I had a Russian girlfriend, and I know Russia, when you grow up with sort of Cold War movies, so you've got this prejudice. It's a really kind of hard, militant culture, and they're all bad people. And Moscow in particular was just amazing, and the people are really fun. Russians are awesome, really, really nice people.
Sweet. And
I actually really like the languages as well. I can't speak it very well, but it's actually a beautiful language as well when you really listen to it. Whereas the way it's portrayed it sounds like they're spitting in the movies. So there's 3 places: the Philippines, Colombia, and Russia.
Perfect. All right, and the next question is of a similar vein, so it can be anywhere, can be a town, can be a country, can be a continent. What's your dream destination, somewhere that you haven't been yet?
Somewhere I haven't been. Next on my list is Nepal. I really want to go. I want to go trekking in Nepal. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Want to go in September? It's coming on all our trips.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
listen off the schedule.
You had a look at the website before, didn't you?
That's definitely my next destination, and my book may be finished by then, so that actually could be the time I go.
100%. Let's make it happen. Yeah,
Cool.
We're going in September.
Done.
I went twice last year.
Did you?
I did base camp twice last year and absolutely loved it.
Okay.
It was just. Once was right before the earthquake. I was there two weeks before the earthquake. I flew back, and then once was 6 months after, and it was really good to see kind of everyone banding together, and and spirits were still pretty high over there. So tourism's kind of just bubbling away again, and it's pretty important for those guys to keep getting people back over there because obviously their economy's just run on tourism. So, it's just amazing. I thought for myself that how many days I love, hiking through wonderful wilderness, and seeing snow-capped mountains. But I actually thought to myself, all right, 15 days of this, how much can you really admire these snow-capped mountains? But it's funny because you're walking through tree-lined terrain and over ravines and through crazy bridges over big rivers, and it's all green. And then you'll go into you'll hit the snow-capped peaks, and then you'll go through little valleys, and it's actually really, really diverse compared to what you would think. You think you're just seeing these snow-capped peaks, but yeah, it's good. So that's a good one. So last one for me is, if you were on a desert island and you had 3 things to keep you sane, what do you take?
Definitely if I'm allowed to have like a laptop with unlimited battery power.
Sure, man.
Yeah.
Given unlimited battery
Well,
to a few guests, so
it's
we
realistic,
can't grudge
and you
you.
can have it.
Yeah, like that's definitely writing my diaries and being alone with my own thoughts keeps me sane. So
Solid charging keypad.
Yeah.
solid charged MacBook Pro.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah,
I like
so
it.
that if I could have my kite with me for the windy days in the desert, I'd sort of invent maybe a little. I don't know.
Desert island.
Desert island. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm allowed to go kiteboarding around
Absolutely,
the
absolutely.
outside.
Mate.
Simple.
Circumnavigate the island every day.
Laptop, kiteboard, and a beautiful woman.
Boom.
Man, sounds good.
Nice. Sounds like a good island.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Well, that's basically it from my questions. Did you have 2 more people you want to take to dinner?
No, I don't. I'm happy with Aaron Sorkin. We're just going to sit there and
Smoke crack.
talk really quickly.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, cool. Rusty, so anything you want to plug before we finish up? Obviously, the new book.
No, thank you very much for the interview. I really enjoyed it, and I hope people, marching powder readers, are inspired to read Colombiano and go travelling. South America is amazing.
100%. And where can they find you if they want, inspiration and they want to send you an email and tell you?
I have finally joined Facebook as of late last year. It took me a long
Took you a
time
while,
to finally join. So I'm on Facebook and I respond pretty quickly.
All right, cool.
Excellent.
Beautiful. Well, that's it from us, mate.
Thank you very much, man.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Tom.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot for coming on the show, and that's a wrap. All right, guys. So if you liked that show, please go ahead and subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber, leave us a rating and review. Rating and reviews help us climb the iTunes charts and help us keep growing into the future. Anything that you want show notes-wise, that will be in the radio section of our website. So head to www.adventurefittravel.com/radio. You'll find it all in there. And again, no sponsors. Hope you enjoyed it. And hope you got lots from it. And see you next week.
Discovery Roger, go for deploy.